The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is day 4 already of this 7-day sesshin. We're more than halfway through the sesshin at this point, here in northern New Mexico at Mountain Gate. And I'd like to share a little bit of the words of an ancient Chinese Chan master, Huang Po, who was also in Japanese known as Obaku. That's the Japanese pronunciation of his Chinese characters. He was the teacher of Rinzai, actually. And there's an excellent book called A Bird Leaves No Trace. It's a translation, new translation of Obaku's writings by Robert Buswell, who is an excellent translator of Buddhist writings, particularly from Korean sources. And in fact, he was a monk in Korea, where Zen is pronounced Son. In China, of course, it's pronounced Chan. And we take the Japanese way of pronouncing it Zen because it's easier for us to pronounce in English. A bird leaves no trace. This actually refers to the innate mind of awareness that we have. When we live in accord with that mind, and there's no outside and inside, there's no us and the mind. This is important to recognize, but language is very, very dense here, and it's impossible to express the truth in language, which is why we have to go beyond words when we are doing our Zen practice. And when we have become let go enough, in other words, when we have recognized our true self, our original nature, our Buddha nature, that face before our parents were born, we leave no traces. There's no residual energy following us around. I think here of when I met Mario Montesa, who is a Italian-Swiss man who was gifted in music to the point where when he was 19 years old, he joined a very famous band, which name I do not remember, as it went on his world tour because it had lost its bass guitarist. The band, as Mario said, had some pretty heavy-duty karma. Many of its band members died violently or died through drugs. But it was a highly successful band, and he was given less than 24 hours to join the band and take off and continue its world tour. And he did, and he was with the band for some years. And at one point, he was coming out of a publicity party in London for the band and woke up 6 weeks later, unable to speak, unable to see, unable to move. He was completely paralyzed. The only thing that he had left was his hearing. And it's very interesting because it is said that when a person dies, the hearing is the last to go, which is why chanting is fairly important for people who are dying and for people who have just died, because it takes a while before death really completes. It's not as instantaneous as we would assume. And he discovered that he could heal himself, and he did actually, although he has residual neurological damage. You can see that when you see videos of him. And I met him when he came through Sogenji and stayed there for several weeks, along with his girlfriend at the time, who became his wife, and a male friend who was helping him. And he had, even at that time, some residual damage from that experience. He had been stabbed in the heart, and doctors told him he was clinically dead 6 to 8 minutes. And then in addition to that, he apparently had several strokes while he was unconscious in the hospital. But he did recover, and he recovered in a rather amazing way. In that near-death experience that he had, he opened to something profound and let go of any need to be somebody. And at this point in time, he actually is a spiritual teacher in Europe. He and I went for a walk at his request while I was living at Sogenji. I actually was the guest housekeeper at the time, and he was staying in the guest house. And he said one day, "I'd like to go for a walk with you." And I said, "Oh, well, you know, your girlfriend is here. I can show you where you two could have a really nice walk. But if wouldn't you rather walk with her?" "No, I want to walk with you." I won't go into the rest of the story, only to say that at a certain point, we were climbing up the steps to a nearby Shinto shrine, and at a certain point he said, "Stop. Let me look at you." And he stayed a couple of feet away from me, and I closed my eyes. And when I closed my eyes, there was no sense of anybody else there. He was so let go. He was like that bird that flies and leaves no traces in the air. And this is something that, as we continue to deepen our practice, can reach that place of such let-go-ness, of such total presence, that there's nobody being present. We carry around, prior to that, a self-image of somebody who has certain characteristics, and based on our history, we also have certain felt needs and certain fears and certain ideas and certain clinging as well. Most people do cling a great deal, and this is why one of the Bodhisattva vows is to work to let go of it. When we open to that true mind, we have let go in a way that there is no clinging, at least briefly. And let me share with you some of the words of Huang Po and of the Korean contemporary master who is making comments in this book as well. You've heard some of this already, because there's a translation in a book that I have shared with you in the past. And this is part of the translation. When Robert Buswell retranslated it, he found some subtle differences that became more clear and more obvious. Here is what one of the paragraphs from Obaku. All the Buddhas and sentient beings are only the one mind. There is no other dharma, meaning phenomenon. Since time immemorial, this mind has never been produced or extinguished. who we are at base has never been produced or extinguished. Yes, people are born. Yes, people die. And the mind is not separate from that. And that brings forth some puzzlement, which is excellent because it is through puzzlement and going beyond words that one can reach that state of mind and experience that freedom that comes from it. Since time immemorial, this mind has never been produced or extinguished. It is neither green nor yellow. It has neither form nor characteristics. It does not belong to the categories of either existence or non-existence. It cannot be measured in terms of new or old, long or short, large or small. It transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. What is right in front of you? That is it. But if you start to think, you will be far off the mark. Which means we have to search not through thought, because thought cannot reach that which we seek to open to. There's a saying in Korean, Soen, turn the light inward and trace the radiance down to its root. And that is exactly what we are working to do in our Zen practice. We normally focus outside, engage in things and people and acts and so on. But we need time to focus inside. And it is through focusing inside and opening. We don't even know what to. But tracing down the radiance to its source. This, in a nutshell, is our Zen practice. And this, in a nutshell, is what will bring about awakening. There is no other way. We have our expedient means to help us focus. For example, the extended out-breath. For example, the koan. It's the perplexity that is either naturally coming up for us, and for pretty much everybody here, that perplexity has existed for a long time, independent of any koan. A koan can help to focus it, but it is not essential. We're all seeking for who we really are. And turning our awareness within, profound presence, yet with that perplexity, that openness to possibility is how we will open to it. Some more words about this. And these words are by this the Soen master. People can handle what they can understand, but when they come across something incomprehensible, they become puzzled and feel pushed to the edge of a precipice. At that moment, let's get back to this. At that moment, they become eager to secure rational understanding without being aware that they're doing so. However, when you let all things go, you no longer care whether a certain thought arises or not. This is because nothing affects a practitioner who experiences no thought. And no thought is not blankness. No thought is a state of such presence that there aren't any thoughts in your mind. There is awareness. You understand intimately where you are in each moment, but there's nothing driving any need to perform, any need to be somebody, any need to do anything but be fully present. And when we are fully present like that, our next step becomes clear. There's a sense within us that says, go this direction. And not in words. There's just a sense to move in a particular direction. And when we do that, in my experience at least, it works 100% of the time. It may not be what we expect. It may not be the direction we assume we ought to go in or want to go in, but if we go with it, it is always right. And I have a couple of examples in my own life, as some of you have already heard. The more recent one was when I chose to locate Mountain Gate up in this northern New Mexico valley, far away from large cities, or any city for that matter. We're in the middle of a tiny little unincorporated village which boasts something like 140 families. And it just houses strung down along initially 2 roads, with one very short road in the middle. And then the 2 roads on either side of the valley join and become one road and go all the way down, in essence, to the Rio Grande, which is quite a trek. When it might have made more sense, or it seemed to make more sense to simply locate in Santa Fe, where people were. But what has turned out is that Mountain Gate has thrived gradually, slowly, because people who need to find us have found us. In Japan, traditionally, to enter a Zen monastery, there are hoops to jump through. If you're living locally in Japan, you actually have to do something called waiting in the garden, and you go to a Zen training monastery with a letter from your ordaining priest, and you put your head down on the steps into the monastery and ask for entrance. And they will usually come out and say, sorry, we don't have any room here. Or they might say, you don't look like you've got what it takes to train here. Go away. They may come out if you persist, which hopefully you will do if you really want to train there, and whack you with the keisaku multiple times. They may pick you up and bodily throw you out. But if you persist for 4, 5, 6, 7 days, head down on the step, then they will say, well, all right. And they'll bring you into a room that has no walls on 2 sides. And it's in a rather central area, so anybody moving by will see what you're doing. And if you sit there and do Zazen without fail, in an ongoing manner, for days, then you may have passed the test, and you'll be allowed to do Zazen with the other monks. For Westerners going to Sogenji, in the past, pre-COVID, the Roshi kind of assumed a couple of things. First of all, if you had been to Sesshin with him in the United States, you could go for a shorter term visit. If you had not, you had to go through being accepted to travel there, which already is an expense, since it would be international travel, and you would be facing pretty considerable obstacles. Unless you were fluent in Japanese, you would have a difficult time even getting there once you landed in an airport in Japan, and then also understanding the instructions that were being given. And with regard to Zen practice, there were no instructions at all. You're just expected to follow the person ahead of you and do what they do. This is why Zendo seating in a Zendo in a Rinzai temple is based on seniority. It's a little difficult to do that here because people come and go. But that's what it is in Japan. You have assigned seating, and it is based on seniority. And then you were required at Sogenji to stay at least a year, a minimum of a year. And in order to do that, the Roshi has to write some significant letters so that you can obtain a cultural visa, because you can't stay more than 3 months otherwise. Now, more recently, and again, this is pre-COVID, you have to stay until you have Kensho experience, which could be 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That's quite a commitment. And now I've just learned from someone who was wanting to go and stay at Sogenji just for a few days. Their life circumstances prevent them from going longer. As it turns out, you cannot go to Japan these days unless you go with a formal tour. So whether you get to Sogenji or not is a very big question. So there are a lot of barriers to practice. Locating up in Ohosarko instead of in Santa Fe or Albuquerque already produced a few barriers. For a long time, we didn't have a website. Now we do, of course, and so people can figure out where we are. But for a long time, we were totally anonymous, and that's fine. In ancient times, the temples of Chan masters, Zen masters, were located up in the mountains in remote areas, and it naturally produced barriers because people had to learn of their whereabouts and get themselves there. When Mitra-roshi encountered Yamada Mumon-roshi on a bus in Kyoto and was so struck by his demeanor that he changed his mind from becoming a psychologist to going ahead and doing Zen training under Yamada Mumon-roshi. When he graduated from college, he walked from Kyoto to Kobe, which is about, let's see, actually it's more than that. Okay, so from Sogenji, it's Kobe, from Okayama to Kobe is 90 miles, because that's where the earthquake was, or the main earthquake, the big one. But from Kyoto to Kobe, I'm not quite sure how long it is. Kobe is an intermediate stop on the Shinkansen from Osaka, and Kyoto is beyond Osaka. So it was a hike, and it took him days, I'm sure, and it was on foot and walking over mountains. When I was at Rochester, and I had finished my formal training, and I knew I yearned for more training. I didn't feel I was ready to teach yet, and I felt that it would be important to get more chance on the Tan, doing Zazen, working with a teacher. And I had already met Mitra-roshi when he came to visit Rochester. But in the meantime, I had gotten hepatitis and meningitis and encephalitis, and I had a secondary infection that took out the right side of my face, paralyzed it completely. And I had extreme exhaustion after that. But I had a strong, deep sense that it was time to go, and I needed to go. It was the right thing to go. And despite everybody's warnings, I went, and it was exactly the right thing to do. And this is the kind of thing that you can open to if you allow yourself to stay truly present without having an agenda, so to speak. That doesn't mean that you don't have plans and so on. I mean, I did have to get enough money together to make the journey, but it's not about floating along in the sky somewhere in some blissed out mind state. It's about being so totally present that there's nobody being present, and therefore the right direction naturally becomes known, and you can move in that direction. It's a choice. You don't have to, but there's a sense of such rightness to it that generally you would want to do it. And again, in my experience, because I've experienced this kind of thing multiple times in my life, each time it has turned out to be exactly the right thing to do. But in order to reach that point, we have to do a certain amount of zazen, which entails letting go of the self-image that has to be somebody, and that can also require working through any difficult history we've had, because that can we can't just jump from one mind state to complete openness. There's a process that has to be undergone, and that process is undergone through our Zen practice. But as was spoken of in the beginning of this reading, when we reach a point where we can't hang on to intellectual understanding, we reach a precipice. And then comes the classic admonition, let go your hold on the cliff and leap hands held high into the fiery abyss, because that's what it can feel like you're going to do, because it can feel so frightening to let go. And letting go is essential to coming to awakening. It's not necessarily a permanent letting go by any means. I mean, we sort of come back into our old life, but we see through it. It's now got holes in it. And we realize that certain things that we held dear really are irrelevant now. And it becomes easier to let go of things. But we are still faced with our karmic baggage, and that is essential to work through that if we are to be totally free. It's a grave misunderstanding that having a Kensho experience is you're home free. You have an opening, and you can choose to continue moving in that direction and open further and deeper, or you can sit there and play with it like a fancy toy. Ideally, of course, you'll open to it and continue to open more deeply through the practice. That's why we have all those koans, is to help expand and deepen the mind. But regular zazen is essential in this process. And if it takes 100 years, there's no problem. If it takes 100 lifetimes, there's no problem. The most important thing is stepping on the path and keeping on going. Mind open to possibility. Willingness to see where we're caught, and open to the physical experience of that feeling of being caught. And being caught can be, having a sudden discomforting mind state. That's a being caught as well. And we tune into that and allow it to dissolve rather than trying to brace ourselves against it or make it change. It's like the clouds floating through the sky. It's like the thunder and lightning that is happening these days for us here, thankfully, because we are in the monsoon season in northern New Mexico, and this year we're having a wonderful amount of rain. It is, the whole landscape is joyful. Now, you've heard some thunder during some of these teisho's during Sesshin. But know that when you reach that precipice, dare to open. Dare to feel the anxiety shaking your chest. Dare to move forward, deeper, because that is letting go, and that is the path to freedom. We are not free when we are caught, and we are caught because of our ideas about ourselves, our self-image, our history, our conditioning. And to come to awakening is the beginning of being less caught in that and being free, little by little, if we persist in that direction of opening. That is what our practice offers, and it is amazing and miraculous. And everyone is capable of reaching that point and going beyond. We come from a long lineage of people. Every morning when we chant, we alternate two lineages, the Rinzai lineage and the Soto lineage. And these are the names of people, prominent people, men and women both, who have passed down profound teachings because they themselves have realized them through the millennia. And if they can do it, so can we. Guaranteed. So thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.